Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG here with another video for you. Today's video is a comprehensive guide on all the changes that were made to the Empire race in Total War Warhammer 3. Now, the Empire still sits as one of the recommended races for players starting the game, but none of these campaigns are really all that beginner friendly, especially Reikland being the starter campaign. It's a tough campaign. The race overall hasn't seen too many significant changes. We have seen one faction become its own faction, get some big moves, and that's pretty distinct. And we've definitely seen a variety of tweaks to the faction, but overall the way that they function and play is the same. It's more that the world around them has changed, just like it is with a lot of other factions. Now, I'm making this guide from patch version 2.2, so we've seen some patches, some changes recently happen for the Empire, some, rebalancing, some fixes of different things, things like Wulfhart's expedition and your quest for the hunters working correctly. Right now, if you're playing as Reikland or Balthasar Gelt, there's some kind of bug that happens with the Elector Counts, so that is something to keep in mind. I'm having to use the Empire Politics patch 2.2 fix to get around that on my campaigns. Hopefully that's something that will be addressed in patch 2.3, but so that's just something to keep in mind. Other than that, I don't think I have any disclaimers related to the current version. I don't think I have anything too interesting to say about the factions beyond what I've said already. There is one more disclaimer I want to put on the changes video, and that is that there are some kind of, global universal changes that have been made to all the races. So I'm not going to talk about changes to things like healing by percentage rather than by points per second. Same thing with vigor restoration or corruption changes, some of the winds of magic changes, or the 10% reload time increase for all missile units. Those are things that I won't really touch. I might touch on them very briefly, but I won't get into in depth in this guide, because it should be assumed that they're applying not only to this race, but to every race globally in the game. Now, for the actual guide to the changes, they are divided into the race as a whole, so talking about any universal mechanics that all the races share that have changed, or any of their standout and unique mechanics as a race compared to others, and how those are different from the past game. And then I will break it down into each faction, so talking about what has changed both for the faction and for Legendary Lord specific traits as well. So with that being said, let's get into the guide and start talking about changes to the Empire as a race as a whole. So to start, we're just pulled into an Empire campaign here real quick. I want to talk about some of the Elector Count mechanics. I know that they don't apply to the entire race, but they're still a pretty significant part of the Empire race, especially for the Reikland and Golden Order factions, so we're still going to talk about them. In terms of the random events as an Elector state leader, so whether an Elector Count wants to declare war with you, or if they're going to go to war with each other and you have to spend prestige to prevent it, when they come under attack by an enemy and you have to spend money or prestige to help them out, those sorts of events, they don't seem to have changed at all. I really wish I had some screenshots to include, and I just double checked and I don't have any right now. But I've played a couple of campaigns out. I haven't seen any differences to them. Of course, like I said, the one difference is that those events seem to stop triggering correctly when something happens in the game. It's not clear, it's defined what is happening that's causing the problem, but Creative Assembly is aware of the issue and it should be resolved in patch version 2.3. So just something to keep in mind. But besides that, those features don't seem changed, right? The random pop-up events related to Elector Counts. In addition, the Electoral Machinations system, where you can spend prestige to improve or worsen relations between yourself and another faction. To other factions, they of course have to be Empire Elector Counts, but this system doesn't seem to have changed either. Now, when it comes to Elector Count bonuses, there have been a decent number of changes. Most of them are pretty small tweaks, but I'm still going to try to cover them in general here. And one general rule is, so this is something that we saw in the global changes. I didn't mention it in that section in the introduction, but as a general rule, any ability that has an area of effect range, like, even like Rally or something like that on a Lord's skill tree, for example, used to have a range of 40 meters in a lot of cases. Now it's been normalized to 35 meters in a lot of cases. There are some Elector Count items that have abilities that were 40 meters. There are some that had abilities that were 30 meters. These have pretty much universally been normalized to 35 meter effect range. So that's one thing that's going to apply to a lot of these, but I'm not going to point it out individually for each one. I have a note here that it's actually a buff for most of these weapons with AoE effects. The exceptions are Ostermark and Reikland's weapons actually got a slight reduction in their range. There's also unique units associated with each of these Elector Count titles that you can recruit. Upkeep has been increased across the board for these units. The general rule is 25 upkeep increase for cavalry units and 50 upkeep for the rest of the units. Exception would be something like the Talabecland Mortars and the Middenland Swordsmen, which are a 33 and 38 gold cost increase respectively. I did not look at the differences in their recruit cost, but I presume there are similar adjustments. As for specific Elector Count changes, for Reikland, this title no longer reduces enemy winds of magic in the area, so that's something they lost. For Wissenland, the steam tank, both the melee and missile damage have been reduced by about 25%, and that's in addition to the 10% reload reduction nerf. For Solland, their unit, the Spearmen with Shields, actually have gained Charge Reflect. I know it is going to let me get over to it. Yeah, this unit has gained Charge Reflect, so that's kind of a nice little gain. For Sturland, their weapon has a slight melee attack reduction. In Warhammer 2, this was a bonus of 10 melee attack. For Ostermark, I'm not sure if this is like a bug or a typo, or if these effects are actually stacking. You can see here it says Vigor Loss Reduction minus 20% twice, right? Once for melee infantry units and once for the Lord's Army. I'm not clear exactly how this works. I'm not really sure how I would test it effectively myself. But that Vigor Loss Reduction for the Lord's Army that's not specified for specific units, that's a new feature on this list. Whether or not it works correctly, I can't say for sure, but it's there. That's a difference. For Hawkeland, we have another similar issue here where potentially we have a 20% bonus to campaign movement range, all armies. Because you can see here again, we've got one for all armies faction wide and another for all armies. Whether this is two separate effects that stack together or it's simply one effect that kind of has some sort of typo in the database, so it's displaying twice, not clear. It's also added a reduction in recruitment cost to missile infantry units, so that is new, and the campaign movement range is also potentially a new thing. For Ostland, their title has been tweaked a little bit. The attrition, I mean, no surprise here, but it's been changed to reflect the updated corruption mechanics in Game 3. So it's not just, chaos corruption, but it's chaos undivided corruption, chaos wastes. So it's an added effect that also affects the chaos undivided corruption. So whenever you're getting some sort of chaos corruption in your territory, it should also affect that in addition to the chaos waste. It's also added this armor-piercing weapon damage fighting against Warriors of Chaos and Demons of Chaos. That is another new change for this Elector Count title. And then last but not least, Nordland's unit, similar to Solland's unit, has Charge Reflection added to their Elector Count State Troop. So that covers all of the changes to all of the different features of the Elector Counts. Like I said, there's a lot of upkeep and cost changes to a lot of their units, but otherwise their stats, their performance are relatively similar. Same thing for a majority of the weapons besides the area of effect range tweaks. Many of them remain the same, but we covered the differences that exist here across the titles, items, and units. So let's move on. The next piece I'll be looking at is campaign changes to buildings and research. Now, just for the sake of demonstration, I wanted to grab this little extra minor settlement. I don't think we're going to need to see it, but I just want to make sure it's an option. The only change that we really see to research is these purge techs. It generally used to be bonuses of 10, so 10 leadership, 10 weapon strength, 10 missile resistance, 10 melee attack. These bonuses have been reduced to bonuses of 5, so 5 leadership, 5 melee defense, etc., etc. That's pretty universal across the board. Other than that, none of these other researches have really changed from Game 2, at least not as far as I can tell. When it comes to buildings, the walls building has had a change from, attrition when under siege is new. That replaces the siege holdout time from Game 2. And the protection building has been pretty drastically changed. It reduces corruption. It gives control directly instead of, reducing control depleting effects from corruption and other sources. It also can reduce corruption in adjacent provinces if you rank it up enough, which is a new effect. And the discoverability of Skaven Undercities now scales per level of the protection building instead of just being a flat number. And we've got the same kind of effects here in the minor settlement as well. Although it may be important to note that the garrison building does not decrease the attrition rate. The only other change that I've really seen that's race-wide is the movement of the transportation, the toll gates, and paved roads building. They've moved these up a tier, but they haven't actually changed the bonuses that you get from this. You get additional income from buildings on this Tier 3 version that wasn't present in Game 2 on the Tier 2 version. But yeah, you can, in the minor settlement, you can no longer build the top tier version. You have to build this lower tier. So generally, the bonuses that they gave didn't really change, except for the added to the Tier 3 income. But it shifted both of the buildings up a tier in requirement. Now that will cover everything for research and building changes. The next things that I'm going to look at are more battle-related changes for the race. That means we're talking about lords and changes to their stats and skill trees. We're going to be looking at generic lords and heroes and their skill trees to see how they've changed, as well as comparing units to one another and see if units' stats have changed from Game 2 to Game 3. So up next, we're going to talk about changes to lords and their skill trees, as well as heroes and their skill trees. Now, overall, I'd say that there were minimal changes to this, with mostly exceptions to the red and some blue skill tree. So we'll kind of take a look at that. We're going to kind of look at this Huntsman General Lord skill tree. A new skill added in patch 2.2 for all factions is Mentor, which adds character experience sharing, which is something interesting to note. For the Huntsman General specifically, the Locked and Loaded skill gives a little bit more speed. And then for all of your lords, we've got some tweaks to the red skill trees. The Empire's Finest gives 2 less melee attack and defense increases at these upper levels. It used to be +8, +8. Speed of Horse nerf has gone from going to like 6 and 6. It used to be 12 and 12 at the max level, so a little bit of a nerf there. Pistol Core, we see less missile strength. It used to be 12% at the max, now it's down to 8. Imperial Gunnery also sees a nerf with the same thing from 12 to 8% missile strength, so a little less damage there. And the Mighty Forge has 8% instead of 10% reload time reduction, so just some minor nerfs across the board to all of these red skill tree skills. And then we also have Taste for Battle, giving 10% physical resistance when it used to give 15% resistance. So those should be the changes to the red skill trees for all of our Empire Lords. On the blue skill tree, Route Marcher, of course, a global change. That campaign movement range is 5% from this instead of 10. They get that 5% movement range back from Headhunter. Headhunter also adds 8% upkeep reduction in addition to the recruit rank and local recruitment rank bonus. So the upkeep reduction and the campaign movement range are new in Game 3. Leader of Renown used to scale, so it was like 3, 9, 3, 8, 15. Now it's just 5% per level. Reassuring Presence is something that's seen a global buff in this game. It's just 10% increase in attrition reduction all the way up. Lightning Strike has been changed. If you're not familiar with the Lightning Strike changes, it's pretty straightforward. It increases battle reinforcement time, and then Lightning Strike is once you have 3 points in it, you can deny enemy reinforcements. Quartermaster used to be scaling, so it was 3, 8, 15% bonus. Now it's just 3 and then 6 and 9. Logistician, same thing, where it used to be scaling up to 15%, but we've seen Casualty Replenishment take a pretty big nerf in Game 3. This one's now a linear bonus of 2 to 4 to 6%. And we already spoke on the Headhunter changes, and that really covers it for all of our Lord skill tree changes. We could look at something like an Archlector or a General of the Empire, but there's really no differences to be talked about here. Some of these, like, they used to have a basic war horse, and that's missing. But besides that, there's no changes that are unique to them, other than some of these global changes that we've talked about, and that includes the changes to blue and red skill trees I just showed on the Huntsman General. As for our heroes, we really don't have many changes to talk about here. Any hero with a wound ability actually has a slightly increased, about 1% chance increase per level of the skill. So it used to be 18%, now it's 21% at this level. All the rest of those skills are really going to be the same. Empire Captain's going to have pretty much all the same skills. Training did get a buff. A 50 experience per turn at level 3 is still not a lot, but it's better than it used to be. I think it used to cap out at 5, 10, 25, something like that. So slight buff to training. No real changes here. Again, wound changes apply for this unit, but nothing significant there. Warrior Priest really didn't see any changes either. All of their skills are basically still the same. The normalization of area of effect ranges on abilities to 35 meters does of course apply here. There's really one change we can talk about here, that is the change to the accusation ability, which now also reduces physical resistance. That is a new effect on this ability that didn't exist previously. But as for the rest of these abilities and the skill trees on all these heroes, anything else that I didn't talk about, it's all going to be the same. So going through the unit roster here, there really wasn't a lot of changes from Game 2 to Game 3. Something like Spearmen without a shield have 6 less upkeep. Flagellants are going to have 2 more melee attacks. We've got some minor tweaks there. The Free Company Militia are going to have 50 less recruit cost and 3 more upkeep. Empire Knights have 50 less recruit cost, 12 less upkeep, 240 more health, 12 more speed, and 2 more melee defense. So for those who recall, when Immortal Empires released, we actually saw a pretty big universal buff to a lot of cavalry units for some of these Game 1 and Game 2 factions, especially these Game 1 factions. So that 12 more speed is actually a pretty decent buff. Reiksguard also got another 240 health increase, 12 more speed, 2 more melee defense. Knights of the Blazing Sun, 240 more health, 7 more speed, and 2 more melee defense. Demigryph Knights have 256 more health and 2 more melee defense, though they don't have any additional speed. And the Demigryph Knights with Halberds have 256 more health and 2 more melee defense. You know, it's actually kind of funny. I'm wondering if Demigryph Knights, despite being massive and heavily armored, somehow actually had better speed than some of these other units in the past game. That's funny to think about. Getting back on track here, Pistoliers, the only change we actually saw here was they have 100 more mass, which it's kind of strange, but that is a change that exists. For War Wagons and War Wagons with Mortars, the change that we saw is they both have 16 more speed, and they also have 100 more mass. So for these, I think the mass change is more important. They're less likely to get stuck in, and of course the speed is going to help with that as well. For artillery, mortars have 4 less upkeep, and then the Luminarch of Hysh actually has 300 less mass than it used to in Game 2. So overall, not really a lot of changes. Like I said, the 10% reload reduction nerf to all factions, all races across the board is something that's going to impact your missile infantry and artillery, missile cavalry, if you are looking at the stats pages to compare. But besides that, we really didn't see a lot of significant changes. Biggest ones would be just the general buffs that a lot of their cavalry units got to increased health, melee defense, and some with speed increases. But other than that, just very minor tweaks to things like upkeep or like a couple points of melee attack or defense. So with that being said, we've covered all of the general changes that will apply to all of the races in the game. It is now time to look at some of the factions more specifically and see what the changes are to them on an individual level. We will be talking about things like their faction effects, things like their diplomacy changes, the legendary lord and if their trait has been reworked, the legendary lord's unique items, the skill tree for the legendary lord, their start location and starting diplomacy changes, their starting army, and their victory conditions. So let's take a look at those. So sticking with Reikland to begin. Initially, Altdorf was actually lacking walls, and it doesn't have the mage building here. As of patch 2.2, they've actually made some tweaks. They've added the walls so that we have a defensive building here. They haven't added a mage building in the advanced military, but we do see that the battle wizards building has been brought down to tier 3, so this effectively acts as your replacement for what would be the mage's building in a different province. They also reduced the level requirement for the Reiksguard headquarters, so this is a tier 3 building now instead of a tier 4 building. The Reiksguard is a change across the game. The Battle Wizards, kind of a change, kind of not a change. The walls, obviously not really a change, but it's something that if you played the Empire on release, this would still be a change for you from patch 2.0 to 2.2, so I think it's worth noting. If we're talking about their faction effects, they actually lost the upkeep for Reiksguard and Great Swords on their faction effects, but they added a 25% prestige gained from battles. If we go to look at their Lord's trait, that upkeep reduction for Reiksguard and Great Swords has been moved to the Lord and is his trait now, so upkeep for Reiksguard and Great Swords. It's also been buffed from 15% to 25%. And basically everything on this trait is new. It used to be just a leadership buff. We now can replenish in neutral territory with this army. We have the ability Guardian for Reiksguard and Great Swords units, which gives some protective buffs to the Lord as long as those units are in range. And we see a charge bonus to the Lord's army. So definitely a shift in what the benefits are here and what the kinds of units they're focused on with this trait, trying to refocus more on that. As for the unique items that he has, the only one that changed is Gal Miraz. It has less control. It used to be a +3 bonus to all provinces. It's now +1. We've added sundering attacks, which will reduce enemy armor, but it has lost magic attacks. Of course, we can see that Karl Franz already has magic attacks built in, so of course he doesn't need that. It's added a 75% AP weapon damage bonus, but it has lost the 10% weapon strength boost that it has. It's also gained 15% weapon strength when fighting against various forces of chaos. It's also lost the post-battle loot bonus, but that is the only changes to the quest items. On his skill tree, the Best of the Empire now has a unit experience gain of 20% instead of a leadership bonus. The Leader of Men skill actually also has this extra sneaky bonus, another 15% upkeep reduction for Reiksguard and Greatswords units. So you can see they're trying to lean more heavily into making, different factions and their lords a little more unique, make their armies more unique. That's a total of 40% upkeep reduction for Reiksguard and Greatswords on your lord's army. So definitely some compositions you could consider playing around with that. The start location for the faction hasn't changed in any way. Their starting diplomacy hasn't really changed too much. We start at war with Warherd of the One Eye, which was not the case in the past game, although it was likely to fight him. We also start with these trade deals with the Dwarf holds. But besides that, we just have non-aggression pacts with the Vampires, Kislev, the Dwarves, and the Bretonnians, which that is not changed. As for the Lord's army, we've seen a decent number of changes here. As many factions have seen. It's added a Greatswords unit, it's added a second Handgunners unit, it's added a second Swordsman unit, and it's added a Mortar. They did lose a Crossbowman and a Basic Spear unit, but overall you can see this is a pretty strong starting army. The victory conditions have changed as well. The short campaign has been changed. You no longer need to fully reclaim the Empire for a short campaign victory. You simply need to defeat the rebels in your starting province and then the two nearby Vampire Counts factions, one to the west here and one to the east. And then, of course, winning 30 settlement attack battles. You no longer need occupying or military allying major capitals either, which was required for short campaign in Game 2. Long victory conditions saw some changes. We do still have to occupy the entire empire, and we need to occupy, loot, or raise 70 different settlements. But we no longer need control of X number of major capitals for a game wide. So that's a change here. It's really just about consolidating and confederating the empire and making sure that it's secure. Up next, we'll be taking a look at the Golden Order. For their faction effects, there is no change. It doesn't outright say suitable climate mountain, but we can verify it pretty easily. As for diplomacy, we used to start at war with both of these greenskin factions, the Black Venom and the Skull Takers. This faction no longer starts at war with the Skull Takers, but the Skull Takers do start at war with Wissenland, so I think it makes sense to just declare war on them and have them die against your fort regardless. The Legendary Lord's trait has not changed in any way. For their unique items, the Staff of Volans has seen some changes. It loses the Winds of Magic Power reserves increase, and the ability does not increase your reserves, but it does now reduce your miscast chance by a pretty good margin. For the skill tree, there's been a couple of changes here. Stronger Than Steel gives +9 armor to the army instead of +10. New formulations used to give 20% ammunition and missile strength, now it's down to 12. And Renowned Scholar used to also have a 20% research rate bonus. That is gone as well. For the start location, it's obviously very similar. You start in the same place, but there are a couple of changes to nearby provinces. Black Mountains has been reworked. Normally the Black Venom tribe used to occupy this capital at the start of the game. That is no longer the case. In addition, Karak Angazar used to be a piece of this province. Again, that is no longer the case, and we can see that Ogres have a starting faction here. This is one of the playable factions, Disciples of the Maw, so you've got a pretty significant new enemy here. In addition, the Grey Mountains province to the west here has been changed. It now has 4 settlements available in it instead of just the 3. It could actually be a good idea to kind of poke in here. Presumably these are Skaven occupying these settlements, take them out and be able to make friends with the Dwarves here to have a little bit of protection to your west. Your capital no longer starts at tier 2 either, it's tier 1, and so you're going to have to level it up and then unlock the landmark building, which in game 2 you started at tier 2 and you started with this building in your settlement. Now as for the starting army, it's been greatly expanded. There's been 2 swordsmen added, 1 crossbowman added, and the Great Cannon is also a new addition. And then for our victory conditions, the short campaign victory is pretty different. We still have to reclaim Sylvania, which we had to in the past. But we no longer have to reclaim the whole empire for short campaign, and don't have to destroy the greenskins either. What a weird requirement that was. You used to have to destroy Grimgor's Wog and then the Crooked Moon faction in Game 2, but you don't have to do that in Game 3. Why they had that previously, well, whatever. That's different now. Then the long victory changes. You do still have to complete control of the empire. Again, no major capitals are required anymore. You don't have to have X number of major capitals through whatever sorts of alliances or ownership. There's used to be a requirement for defeating Khazrak the One-Eye and his faction in this as well. That is no longer the case. The next faction we'll look at here is the Cult of Sigmar faction, led by Volkmar the Grim. This is a new faction which has, the same legendary lord as it did before, but this is a totally new experience for Game 3. It's a pretty significant rework for this faction, where Volkmar the Grim used to just start in Reikland and basically be the same campaign, but with a different lord and access to some different units from the DLC. So we've got a decent number of changes to cover here. For faction effects, the magic item drop chance is gone, but the ability to claim the books of Nagash are added. Various effects exist from the books, which I really won't get too deep into here. You can look pretty easily for yourself in your own campaign to see what kind of bonuses you have available to you for these. It's a pretty cool system. It's, kind of ripped from the Tomb Kings if you're familiar with their system. But so it gives you something like a different kind of objective to pursue. The key thing to note is that each book essentially gives you a new Elector Count title, as we can see up here. You would get one of the items from one of the Elector Count titles, and then you also would unlock, for the first 5 levels, 2 Elector Count state troops at a time, and then eventually getting 1 state troop at a time, also getting increased upkeep reduction for those state troops along the way. When there's only 1 troop to unlock, you start getting ward save for all of your characters. So it's a pretty cool system, some cool stuff to unlock there. Now for the Lord trait, this has not changed at all. For his unique items, the Staff of Command no longer gives magic attacks, but Volkmar does have magic attacks built in. In his skill tree, the Blessed Holy War now has a 5%, like the hero action success chance of 15%. That is a 5% increase from Game 2. That's really the only change we have here. For the start location, obviously this is a big change. We're in a totally new area, fighting totally new enemies with totally new objectives, so it's pretty cool. Not worth really covering the diplomacy changes because they're not really relevant in the same way. His starting army has added a greatsword, it's added a mortar, it's added a handgunner, it's added a halberdier, it's swapped a flagellant from the Regiment of Renown flagellant he used to start with. It's just a regular flagellant now. He used to start with Knights of the Blazing Sun, but that has been swapped for just a basic Empire Knights now. Obviously, with the relocation, that means his victory conditions have changed a lot. Short victories to wipe out Tzeentch and the Vampire Counts down here. It's probably a little bit weird now that they moved Tzeentch from being on Dawn's Landing to south in the Chaos Waste here. Going to be a little bit more of a challenge for that one, but should still be pretty cool. The long victory conditions, though, still requires control of all provinces of the Empire, either by direct ownership or through vassals and military allies, which is not really what I was expecting going into this. I think that that's a strange requirement, and you may also notice that neither of these campaign victories have anything to do with the Books of Nagash. Now, maybe requiring them would be a little bit weird or a little different, but I think it'd be reasonable for long victory to require 3 or 4 books sealed away. It's a really cool mechanic. It's strange that it doesn't tie into the victory conditions. Stranger still that we just have to reunite the Empire. I haven't played out this campaign, unfortunately, so I can't answer this question, but my question would be, can we, are we operating as an independent Empire faction, meaning that we'd be able to military ally and vassalize or whatever these factions up here? It just seems strange. If you want long victory, you're going to have to probably fight for control of most of the southern area, and then you're also going to have to move and help rescue the Empire, because they will surely be struggling to reclaim the entire Empire all on their own. Yeah, still, either way, it still seems like a pretty awkward system. Even if you could military ally the Empire, I don't think that it's going to give them, I don't think you're still going to have to go up there and do work. Kind of a weird situation, but that covers everything for Volkmar the Grim and the Cult of Sigmar faction. That means our last faction to look at is the Huntsmarhal's Expedition. The faction effects have no apparent changes on the surface. However, the patch notes for version 2.2 do say, armies spawned from Markus Wulfhart's hostility mechanic will now only spawn from certain specific locations in Lustria, and if Wulfhart or his ally occupy these regions, the armies will no longer spawn. So they've tweaked how the enemy spawnings work for the hostility mechanic, meaning that there's going to be distinct preset locations that these hostility armies will spawn from, and if you own that province, or if you are allied with somebody who owns a province, it will prevent these armies from spawning. So in theory, you could actually reach a point where these enemy army spawnings just can no longer happen at all. So that's a pretty significant change for this campaign. I don't know how well the Wulfhart's Hunters mechanics work at this time. I know on release there were some issues with it. Previously you had to like search ruins to solve a puzzle, like the puzzle mechanics that they had in Warhammer 2. You needed to be able to search a ruins with one of these heroes to get one of their quest steps progressed. They've claimed to have fixed this. I haven't played out a full campaign of these guys either yet, so I can't really tell you that whether that's the case for sure or not, but it sounds like it's been addressed. Looking at our legendary lord and his unique trait, there have been no changes here. Looking at his quest items, there have been no changes here. Looking at his skill tree, the Master Survivalist skill has seen a slight reduction to the casualty replenishment rate, and his Locked and Loaded skill has seen a slight buff to the speed bonus that it gives you. As for his start location, it hasn't really changed. I mean, technically he's still in the Temple of Kara, he's in a similar province, he's still in Lustria, but the overall landscape of the map of Game 3 has changed enough that his position is a little different. He no longer starts at war with Laxland, and instead starts at war with the Skaven tribe who occupy this province. He's still going to have some of the same enemies to the north and same enemies to the south, but the physical landscape of this province and many others in Lustria has been changed pretty significantly, so obviously that has an impact on him. We've also seen some factions move around in this game, so that's going to be a little bit of an interesting change as well. I don't think it's made for dramatic changes in the short term of his campaign, like the very earliest parts, but I'm sure in the long term it's going to look a bit different. As for his starting army, it has added a halberdier unit, it's added 3 units of basic spearmen, it's added a huntsman, 1 archer, and we lost 1 shielded spearman, so a pretty significant amount of changes to this army. For his victory conditions, the short campaign he no longer needs to control the entirety of Lustria, but he still does need to reach 100 acclaim, which is a pretty big goal, and needs to wipe out most of the nearby major factions, some Vampire Coast, Skaven, and even some Lizardmen, so you're really going to have to go all out here. For the long campaign victory, he doesn't have the added major factions to destroy. There were a couple extras in Warhammer 2, but you do need to basically control all of Lustria in order to get the long campaign victory. He no longer has the major capitals requirement either. That seems to be something they've pretty much universally removed, where you used to have, certain major faction capitals through either direct control or military ally or vassal. That is no longer the case here. We simply have to take over Lustria. So with the final faction out of the way, that covers everything I wanted to in this guide. We've talked about the more general overarching changes that have been made to the Empire race as a whole. We've talked about some of the more specific changes that occurred with each faction and legendary lord. There are still some things that are harder to speak directly to, which are more about the overall shifting landscape of Game 3. And as I've mentioned, I haven't had the time yet to play out all of these campaigns, so certainly there may be some details that I'm missing or some other changes I might have overlooked or may simply have not gotten far enough to be aware of. But suffice to say that these campaigns are all quite a bit more exciting in my personal perspective. I'm really happy to see that they've already fixed a lot of things which weren't quite right on Immortal Empire's release as well. They still have a couple things to fix, especially the Empire politics system for the 2 of the factions. That needs to be fixed ASAP. But hopefully this information helps guide you through your own campaigns a little and helps you understand what things will work a little differently than what you're used to when coming from Game 2. There's not too many crazy changes, except for Volkmar the Grim, but overall the Empire still seems to be a lot of fun to play. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to like and subscribe so you can keep up with future videos from me. If there's something you'd like to see me do next, please let me know in the comments section below. Of course, if there's changes or details you think I missed, definitely let us all know in the comments section as well. And if you have any follow-up questions of your own for this material, please feel free to ask. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.